while millions of people are screaming at their TVs, painting their faces, and feeling emotionally crushed because 11 strangers lost a game, there's a massive group of people quietly sitting on the sidelines, completely unaffected. And according to neuroscience, their brains might actually be wired differently. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear may completely change how you see the sports-obsessed people around you, and maybe even how you see yourself. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Not caring about sports doesn't make you boring. It doesn't mean you lack passion, and it definitely doesn't mean something is wrong with you. But there is something fascinating happening in your brain that separates you from the millions of people who follow sports like a religion. Let's start with the obvious question. Why do so many people care so much? Humans are tribal creatures. For thousands of years, survival depended on belonging to a group. Your tribe protected you from predators, shared food, defended territory, and gave you identity. Being part of something bigger than yourself wasn't optional. It was life or death. And sports are basically modern tribes with better uniforms and expensive merchandise. When someone watches their team play, their brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone that strengthens family connections and friendships. In a strange way, the brain begins to treat athletes like members of its own clan. Wild, right? Your brain can literally trick you into feeling emotionally connected to people you've never met, simply because they wear the same colors as your chosen team. But here's where it gets interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often show what psychologists call lower tribal instincts. Their identity isn't tightly wrapped around belonging to large groups. Instead, they tend to define themselves through personal values, individual goals, and internal meaning. They are more likely to think, I don't need to belong to something bigger to feel complete. And there's actual research behind this. Studies have found that people with lower interest in spectator sports often show significantly less us versus them thinking. They don't automatically dislike someone just because they support a different team or belong to a different side. But wait, it gets weirder. What happens inside the brain of a passionate sports fan during a game is surprisingly intense. You know that feeling when you're about to open a gift? That suspense, that anticipation, that's dopamine firing in your brain. Sports fans experience that same chemical rush over and over during a match. Every play, every pass, every near miss becomes a tiny hit of anticipation and reward. It's not just entertainment. It's a carefully timed emotional roller coaster powered by uncertainty. And uncertainty, as psychology shows, is one of the most powerful triggers for addiction-like behavior. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes sports so psychologically powerful. In behavioral psychology, there's something called intermittent reinforcement, the most addictive reward pattern known to science. It's the same mechanism that keeps people glued to slot machines. You don't win every time. You don't lose every time. The unpredictability is what keeps the brain hooked. Every time a team almost scores, every time the outcome hangs in the balance, the brain releases another tiny surge of dopamine. Not because something happened, but because something might happen. That maybe is what keeps people watching. But here's the twist that most people never consider. For people who don't care about sports, that dopamine system simply doesn't activate in the same way. Watching competition from the sidelines doesn't produce the same emotional reward. The brain looks at the screen, and instead of feeling anticipation, it quietly asks a different question. Why am I investing energy into something I can't control? And surprisingly, research suggests this difference might not just be personality, it might be partly genetic. Variations in dopamine receptor genes have been linked to how strongly people respond to competitive spectator experiences. In other words, your indifference toward whether a team wins or loses might not be laziness, boredom, or lack of enthusiasm. It might be wiring. But dopamine isn't the only psychological layer at play here. There's another phenomenon that explains why sports fans often feel victories so personally. Psychologists call it burging, basking in reflected glory. When their team wins, fans say, "We won." But when the team loses, something interesting happens. Suddenly, it becomes, "They lost." Notice the shift. That small change in language reveals something deeper about identity. The victory becomes personal, but the failure stays distant. It protects self-esteem while still allowing emotional celebration. People who don't obsess over sports tend to engage in this pattern far less. Their sense of self-worth isn't tied to outcomes happening somewhere else, performed by people they've never met. Instead, their self-concept stays anchored in things they directly influence. Their work, relationships, skills, and daily actions. And here's where another surprising layer emerges. Sports fans often score higher on certain measures of empathy, but not always in the way people assume. They practice emotional investment in strangers wearing their team's colors. They celebrate their struggles, feel their losses, and rejoice in their triumphs. But people who don't follow sports aren't lacking empathy. They're allocating it differently. Think of empathy like a limited resource. Emotional energy that must be distributed somewhere. Some people invest it in teams and players. Others invest it in art, music, relationships, ideas, or causes that feel personally meaningful. And that difference quietly shapes the way meaning is built in their lives. And that's where the conversation becomes much deeper than sports. Because what we're really talking about isn't games, teams, or scoreboards. We're talking about how people create meaning in their lives. Sports fans often find meaning in narrative. The comeback story, the underdog victory, the last-second miracle. These moments feel powerful because they mirror the structure of great stories. Tension, struggle, uncertainty, resolution. It's drama unfolding in real time, and the unpredictability makes it feel alive. But people who don't care about sports often experience meaning differently. Instead of watching stories unfold, they prefer building their own. They look at the randomness of a game and think, why would I emotionally invest in an outcome I can't influence? Why attach my happiness to something happening far away, controlled by people I don't know? And that question alone reveals a powerful psychological distinction. Researchers sometimes describe this difference as parasocial investment versus direct engagement. Sports fans form one-sided emotional connections with teams and players. Relationships that feel real, even though there's no direct interaction. But non-sports people often prefer environments where their actions matter, where their effort changes the outcome, where their presence makes a difference. Not spectators, participants. And that shift changes more than just hobbies. It changes how life feels. Because here's something quietly radical that most people never notice. People who don't obsess over sports often report feeling more present in their own lives. Instead of spending hours emotionally riding someone else's victories and defeats, they invest those same hours into their own growth, relationships, curiosity, and creativity. They're not watching tension unfold. They're living it. And this is where the biggest misunderstanding happens. Many people assume that not caring about sports means missing out on a universal human experience. That somehow, if you're not emotionally attached to a team, you're disconnected from something essential. But the truth is far more interesting than that. You're not missing out. You're redirecting. The same human need for excitement, belonging, and purpose still exists. It's just being fulfilled in different places. Maybe through building something meaningful, maybe through learning, maybe through relationships that grow over time instead of moments that flash and disappear. And once you understand that, something shifts inside you. The next time someone asks, "Did you see the game?" and you genuinely didn't care, you won't feel awkward. You won't feel left out. You'll recognize that your brain is simply calibrated differently. Not broken, not boring, just tuned toward a different kind of engagement. You're not sitting on the sidelines of life. You're playing a different game. And sometimes, that game has higher stakes because the outcomes are yours, the victories are personal, and the growth is real. So if this perspective resonated with you, if you've ever felt different from the crowd or wondered why certain things excite everyone else but leave you completely unmoved, then you'll want to keep exploring this side of your psychology, because understanding how your mind works isn't just interesting, it's powerful. And if you're ready to discover why quiet people process the world differently, why independent thinkers often feel misunderstood, and why being different might actually be your greatest advantage, then watch the next video waiting for you right now. You might finally recognize yourself in ways you never expected.